Hello, adventurers, and welcome back to the Dragon's Lair. I trust my hint wasn't too difficult or annoying for you? Well, if you figured it out, congratulations. If you didn't, as you can clearly tell by the title, today we will be discussing Harry Potter from the Harry Potter series. I don't know if that was obvious. I don't know. Well, we're going to be talking about The Boy Who Lived, so let's jump right into it, shall we? Before we do, there's a small note that I need to make regarding what I'm basing the entire series off of. I'm going to be using the movies, not the books. So if something happened in the books, it may not have happened in the movies, and I'm not going to go through every example of things that happen in the movies, but if I mention something and you read the books and you're sitting there thinking to yourself, that didn't happen, it did happen in the movies. And that's where I got it from. So hopefully that clears up any sort of confusion for the future, and now we can really begin. So, starting off with the first statistic, strength. Harry Potter at times has strength, and then at times doesn't. For instance, go ahead and clear my bases. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. In the first movie, when he is on the Quidditch team doing his Seeker thing, at one point, his broomstick was being cursed by someone in the stands. Hermione and Ron see it, and Hermione goes to actually stop the person from doing the cursing. She may or may not have the wrong person in mind that is doing the cursing, but, you know, that's something for you to watch yourself. At any rate, Harry is fighting his broomstick that's being cursed by someone, and still manages to have enough strength in reserve to, from completely down pull-up position, pull himself up and back onto the broomstick. So that has to count for something. There's also the fourth movie, where Harry pushes both Ron and the French girl's little sister up through the water to safety, while simultaneously fighting off, what are the things called?
Grindylows.
Grindylows.
Yeah.
Thank you. I couldn't, just for some reason I blanked right now, I don't know why. Whatever. But, yeah, he's swimming through the water with Ron, who's not huge, but also not small, and the French girl's sister, so he's got one in one arm, one in the other. And he's fighting off a bunch of mer people, essentially, at the same time. So that's going to be a little difficult to do. However, there's also instances of poor strength, and this could be plot things, but, you know, we're gonna assume for the sake of these movies that it's not the plot and it's the characters themselves. But in the second movie, he is going down to the Chamber of Secrets, and it's him, Ron, and then the professor. Well, at one point, the walls cave in, the ceiling caves in, and Harry is separated from Ron and the professor. And, well, the rocks aren't huge. Like, they're not giant boulders. Some of them are pretty big, but for the most part, they're small pebbles and medium-sized rocks that most people wouldn't have too much difficulty moving. And both of them, for the sake of it, they couldn't move them. So there are a few instances of poor strength like that. That being the main one that comes to mind. So, for the sake of this, I have to say, strength really isn't all that important to Harry. At least not for my build and from what I've seen. So, it's going to be middling, somewhat average. If the instances of poor strength stick out to you, then you might go 8. If what I mentioned earlier with the Grindylows and the broomstick stuck out to you, then you might go 12, but I'm putting it at 8 to 12 for that very reason. Moving into dexterity. This is a little more apparent with Harry. So we're gonna sit there and say that one of the instances of good stealth would be when he's sneaking around the castle, right? Sneaking around Hogwarts. Now, for the sake of this, though, he does usually have the cloak on him, his cloak of invisibility. That's not really a spoiler, it's just kind of, like, there. Maybe I should have said spoiler, but I don't really think it matters. Because, I mean, I didn't spoil anything, really. If you're upset about that, then, get over it.
It's just something he got.
Yeah, it's an item he has. I mean, it changes hands multiple times, so it's not really a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, he does use his Cloak of Invisibility, so that would help him with his stealth, so I don't know if we can really get an accurate gauge there. However, there are, spoiler alert, I will say 3, 2, 1, we should be good, instances of when that cloak doesn't actually help his stealth, when someone like Dumbledore, or at times seemingly Professor Snape, and the hallway stalker of a custodian can seemingly see through the cloak. So it's a little odd there. There is that. He also has a thing called the Marauder's Map, which could theoretically be used to help his stealth. Same thing with the Cloak of Invisibility, where the Marauder's Map changes hands, and it's not really a spoiler. But I've already said spoiler, so it's on you if you're still watching. But he has that, and it could theoretically help with his stealth, because he can see who's coming and theoretically hide, and since they don't have the Marauder's Map, they won't know he's there if he's done a good enough job at hiding. So, there are a few things that build up his stealth, but you also have things with other instances of dexterity, like the fact that he is a Seeker on his Quidditch team, and that's going to require quite a bit of agility given how small and fast the Seeker orb is. I forget the name of it offhand.
I have no idea.
Snitch, the golden snitch.
Snitch.
There we go. All it takes is staring off into space for a second.
Yep.
So, there are things of that nature that kind of help with his dexterity. I'm gonna place dexterity rather at 14 to 16, making sense. Not super, super high, but also not low. But it's kind of up to you. Moving into Constitution. Aight. Here we go. This kid's gone through quite a bit. I mean, he almost dies at least 4 times every movie, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but not really. I mean, the kid literally regrows an arm at one point in time. Not a spoiler, actually. Because the way he lost his arm didn't have anything to do with any plot point or anything like that. It just, it happened.
One of them things.
Yeah, it just,
Mm-hmm.
Could have happened to anyone.
True.
No, it couldn't have.
Yeah.
But it didn't have anything to do with the story, so I don't feel bad for saying that. I will go ahead and cover my bases for the rest of this, though. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. He survives a lot. As I said, he literally regrows an arm. He faces Dementors and Death Eaters constantly throughout the movies. There's a lot of things that are constantly just trying to kill him. So there's that. I mean, it gets to the point where he literally survives death curses. Things that, for people that play D&D are equivalent to the power word kill spell, except they don't have that maximum health requirement, right? So if you have more than 100 health, the spell doesn't have an effect on you. Power word kill.
Nice.
But not with the death curse in Harry Potter. It can just straight up kill everything. Like it just does. But he survives 2 of them. That's why he's called the boy who lives, if you paid attention to my intro. Things of that nature. So, it gets to the point where he's got to have some sort of high constitution to be able to sit through nearly dying 4 times a year, regrowing arms, facing things that are literally trying to eat your soul, and surviving death curses. So, for this, it's pretty cut and dry, 18 to 20. I mean, I hate to say it because, you don't really want to start off with super high scores, but this is one of those instances where we just can't ignore it. 18. Moving into intelligence. Alright. Harry is not the smartest person of the group, right? He's not the one that everyone goes to for a really smart solution to their problems. However, spoiler alert, I'm going to go ahead and cover my bases for here in a second. 3, 2, 1, we should be good. He does do his fair share of thinking for the group. He is smart, he is intelligent. I mean, he goes through and he's good at solving problems. He's good at solving riddles. He's good at solving problem riddles. It's one of those things that he does. I mean, he goes through the fourth movie and solves the riddle of where the next challenge is going to be for the Goblet of Fire, right? He does that sort of thing. He's really good also at making potions. That being said, he does have a pretty good tutor to help him through it. Would you say earlier it's almost like he's cheating his way through it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah.
A little bit.
Using someone else's work would technically be considered cheating.
At least it was correct work, though.
True, though. The worst thing about cheating is when you cheat poorly.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know. But it's that sort of thing. He's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he's the one that people use the most. That was a weird saying. Don't use that. I'm gonna move on. I'm putting his intelligence at 14 to 16. 12 to 16, I'll say. Moving on. Into wisdom. This is more Harry Potter's statistic, which is a little weird for what you would assume is a wizard. But let me explain. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. There's an entire movie based around Harry Potter being able to take his real-world experience and put it to the test, right? What Harry does is he uses the knowledge that he learns in school and he puts it into practice in the real world. And the movie follows him teaching his real-world experience to other people. People like Ron, Hermione, a few others who are not necessarily named. Ginny's in there, Neville's in there, but there are a lot more that are named and aren't named. So that kind of goes to show his wisdom. He also says it himself, where it's one thing to learn it in school, and it's another thing to be able to put it into practice in the real world, as real as the wizarding world of Harry Potter can be. But you get the point, where he goes through and he's able to apply what he knows to a real situation, a life and death situation, especially when someone is throwing death curses your way pretty much constantly. It really is a life and death situation. I mean, pair that with the fact that he does have a little bit of knowledge and isn't expressly stupid. The fact that he can put it into practice as often as he does, as I said, 4 times a movie, goes to show how good he is, how wise he is. So I've got to put this score at 18 to 20 as well. Moving into charisma. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, we should be good. He has a natural presence about him. People know him. He's kind of a living legend in that sense. But it goes beyond that, where he's able to really talk to pretty much everyone. I mean, he makes friends with Ron and Hermione pretty much instantaneously. And those two are somewhat to be considered almost outcasts. No one really likes the Weasley family, and everyone kind of looks down on Hermione because of who she is. And, you know, the hardest part about making friends with them would be their constant second-guessing themselves, and Harry's able to do it anyway. He's able to make friends with them anyway. Pair that with the fact that he's able to talk to a lot of people, just kind of in general. I mean, you always have those few Malfoy that you can't talk to and make friends with, but he's able to go and make friends with people like Luna, Neville, even well, I repeat myself with Ginny Weasley, but you get the point. He does go through his point in time where he has difficulty talking to specifically girls in the fourth movie with the dance for the Triwizard Tournament.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty much just that scene where the problem arises. There are a few times where he goes and says things that he probably shouldn't. He makes Hermione mad at him a couple of times.
Maybe a couple.
And then you have the date scene at the dance of the Triwizard Tournament where that was just not cool.
Mm-mm.
But those are few and far between when it comes to the scenes, and for the most part, he's an all-around likable guy. So because of that, I've got to put his charisma at somewhere around 14 to 16. Moving into the build. We're going to go with the straightforward build, so let's start with the race. He's obviously a human, right? Although, I can't really say obviously too much anymore because this series has quite a few possibilities for different races. But yeah, for this, I went with human for Harry. Specifically the human variant, and what that does is it gives you +1 to 2 different ability scores. It also gives you a proficiency of your choice. I would go with something like Arcana to mimic his, spellcasting abilities, or Agility to mimic his flight on broomsticks. It also gives you a feat of your choice. Something like Lucky makes sense. Things tend to happen that are kind of like, hey, that's really convenient. It's really lucky. So with that, you get 3 points of luck. You can use that to give yourself advantage on an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw. Unfortunately, not on death saves. Or you can impose disadvantage on an attack roll against you, and they reset after a long rest. What was the first feat I had down? I know it has to be changed a little bit, but I forget what it was.
The defensive duelist.
Okay, yeah. That's what I was thinking, but I couldn't remember exactly. Defensive duelist, essentially what that does is you're really good at defending. It's going to have to be changed from what it is in regular rules to include spells, and essentially what it would do is boost your AC and saves against spell attacks or spell saves against you. Although that would be DM's discretion, so that might not be the feat you need to go with. Something like Warcaster or Spell Sniper would be useful a little later on, but not outright. And Lucky is just kind of the feat I personally would go with, but take that with a grain of salt. Moving into class. Obviously, you're going to go Wizard for the straightforward build. Something like Evocation makes sense when you're dealing damage and that sort of thing. However, Abjuration makes a little bit more sense to me. That's about protecting yourself and others against attacks, right? And that's something Harry does quite a bit. For instance, he goes through and his Patronus is his main thing, and that's something you're going to get to be good at with Abjuration. He also keeps his friends from dying as much as he can, like a good person does. What's the 14th level thing?
14th level, you gain advantage on spell saves and damage resistance from spells.
Thank you. I forget exactly what that's called, but that's an ability you get at 14th level for Abjuration. There is another thing called Warcaster for your subclass. I don't know where it comes from, so I don't know if it's official material or not. I don't know. It's not Unearthed Arcana, but I don't know how official it really is, so you might have to check with your DM before you can do it. But essentially what that's about is protecting yourself and others, and using that to then deal damage. For instance, you gain a little bit extra force damage on a spell that you cast after you've used Counterspell or Dispel Magic. So it's things of that nature. But it's also kind of what I said with Abjuration, where it's about defending yourself. You can take, the way it reads is strands of magic to defend yourself against spells that are being cast against you. And for a very spell-driven campaign, like a Harry Potter one would be, makes sense. pretty useful. Moving into the conceptual build. The only real race that we had, aside from human, was elf. We went with specifically high elf to get an extra wizard cantrip, but there just really wasn't a whole lot that fit with Harry Potter. He's pretty straightforward. If you have any ideas, feel free to leave a comment below. As for class, I went with Ranger up until level 3, which sounds stupid, but it was to make Hedwig not useless. Because the one problem that I did have with the movies was that Hedwig just spent his entire time in the cage. Unless they needed him to fly and deliver a letter, which he did once.
There was the one scene.
What one scene?
Where they were on the brooms. It was whenever they were trying to kill Harry. And Hedwig...
Oh!
Yeah.
Hey, you're gonna get me.
Yeah.
You need to say spoiler alert there, friendo.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. I know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
It was one of the final movies where they were going to try to get Harry away from where he was to safety, and Hedwig's finally out of his cage for all of 3 seconds before he gets death cursed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess he was useful in the end, but he spent the vast majority of his time in the cage, and, you know, it's one of those, like, Ranger can make Hedwig useful, aside from just something to block you from getting murdered. Which is kind of a one-time use thing, so that's not really that good. But then I went with Druid to level 17. Before I talk about that, though, the Rangers have favorite enemies and favorite terrain.
Mm-hmm.
So, favorite enemy, I went with humans. In favorite terrain, castles weren't an option, so I went with forests. There's also a thing that, I forget what it's called, remind me, but you could get leather armor, if possible, right after favorite enemies.
The fighting style would be defense.
Oh, defense, fighting style. You'd need armor for that. Essentially, what it is when you're wearing armor, you gain like a +2 bonus to AC. Or you gain a bonus to AC. I forget the number exactly, but that would kind of be a useless feature for most wizards unless your DM allows you to wear armor, which most spellcasters can't. Now moving into Druid, I went with Druid from there to level 17 because they get healing magic, they get abjuration magic, they get damage magic. They're pretty all-around sort of casters, which is kind of what Harry is. He does his fair share of fighting in, well, fight scenes, spell duels, but he also does his fair share of defending himself and his friends. He's an all-around. So I went with Druid because they're kind of all-around, and it matches with his wisdom score, which is good. It, you know, makes sense. Specifically, I went Circle of...
Forest.
The land, forest. Yeah, there's another one, though, Circle of...
Grassland?
Yeah, the grassland was the subcategory. Or a subcategory that could make sense, but there was some sort of shepherd thing. Take a look for it real quick.
Oh, Circle of the Shepherd, yeah. For
Did
all
I...
those spirits.
Oh, yeah, but that's where the similarities lie.
Mm-hmm.
There were a bunch of spirits with that one, but they didn't really do a whole lot. I went with Spirit. The spirits make sense because you have the Patronus, then... I said spoiler alert, but here we go again. 3, 2, 1. We should be good. The spirits of dead people are kind of all around him a lot. His parents come back. Sirius Black comes back. So things of that nature. But again, that's pretty much where the similarities end. Into backstory, unless there's something I'm forgetting. No, it feels like it, but I'm not. Cool. Harry is the son of Lily and James Potter, who were unfortunately killed by Lord Voldemort. In the process, though, they wound up saving Harry from his otherwise untimely demise. For protection, the wizarding world thought it best to send him off with his aunt and uncle for protection. Some protection they gave him. But he eventually received his Hogwarts letter and made his way to the school. On the train ride there, he met Ron and Hermione, and shortly after arriving at Hogwarts, he met Draco Malfoy. That is where Harry's story begins. There will be an items video a little later on, so for now, that is all I have for you fine adventurers. I do really hope that the hint and little guessing game we played was more fun than it was bothersome and annoying for you. I do intend to keep that going, just so you know. But, aside from that, if you can't possibly wait until my next video, which will be on Ronald Weasley, feel free to come check out my Discord or come hang out on Twitch. Other than that, I will catch you all later.